Hello.
Hello.
Hey, good morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Good morning. Interesting. Did you all see the email that I sent on the mask versus list? Any feedbacks?
No, I haven't got to it yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't
No.
checked yet. Sorry.
No worries. I sent it over last week, I think. I'll paste the context just in case if someone wants to take a quick look. Let's wait for some more folks.
Hello.
Hello. Let's give a couple of more minutes, like till 9:05, for more audience to join in. I have posted an agenda in case someone wants to take a look. Let me share the agenda doc. Mhm. Hi, Dan. How you feeling?
How's it going?
Doing good. Just waiting and giving a couple of more minutes. And then we'll start. Oh, it's 9:05 already. Should we start? What do you think? I'll give a couple more minutes. Is Ryan joining, Dan? Any ideas?
I don't know. That's a good.
Oh, okay, let me ping him as well. I guess everyone is here. Okay, so hi everyone. Let's get started. I'll start with my sharing with my screen. And that is going to share this. Okay. So I pre-collected all the some of the open questions and wanted to discuss these today. So as you might have seen, I sent out an email, I think last week, on what should be our stance on how should we represent them, actions versus transforms, and the second one was like what is the list that we start with. As a course of that, I think I found one very interesting use case with BigQuery. So basically, we were thinking of so far Ranger is the only one which has a predefined mask. Turns out BigQuery also has a set of predefined masks, and their way of attachment is very simple. Like if you see, the way it does is, I'll open my thread. Here is that, oh, it's not rendered properly. Okay, is this even, oh yeah, this is visible. So the way it does is that whenever you're attaching a policy, that might be a masking policy, for example, they have a concept of predefined expressions that I showed here. And the experience is just you define as an argument that, okay, this is a dynamic data masking policy, and this is the predefined expressions you're attaching it to. And obviously we know about Ranger that has predefined masks, that is this, that we can attach it to the entity when we are attaching the policy or defining the policy against that particular entity, whether it be a column or a whole table. So this is one additional data point. So a couple of things. I didn't get any feedback yet on the whole representation, but I did talk to some of the folks offline on the action one. I talked to Yufei. Yufei, you have anything to say on this one? On actions versus transforms debate? Yufei, you're not audible. I saw you.
I don't think Yufei is here.
Oh, I think he dropped then. Okay. So I think he was saying that he's supportive of actions, considering how simple it is to describe an action and how it will be easier for the engines to start with the actions and go with there. Maybe we can wait for him to join again.
So that sounds good. I'm glad Yufei is interested, but should we pause for a minute and ask, like, who does anyone think that actions are a bad idea or unnecessary or duplicative?
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like, given that we have silence here, I mean, I'm at least for actions. We're not hearing a lot of dissent either on the mailing list thread or here, but yeah, some.
I think it might feel duplicative, but I think they're completely two different concerns, and it would be just nicer to have action and transforms as separate things that are defined. So I'm for it as well.
Thank you.
Have we defined what the scope of an action is? Like, is it purely just a masking function? Previously, we had talked about potentially actions like hiding columns. Like, do we have a crisp definition of like, what can an action do? What is expected in terms of configurability? Are we taking, it looks like the approach that, what was it?
BigQuery?
Ranger takes is like they have like a very strict enumerated set, like mask class 4,
Yes.
right? And it's not like there's no parameters. We're just saying like, hey, we've got a predefined set of things that will allow you to do, and we're going to call that like the good set of common actions that people can perform. So I guess there's kind of 2 points to my question, or 2 parts of my question. First part is, what is the scope of an action? Second part is it just a strictly enumerated set? So we take like the simplest approach. Is that the idea?
So I think that that's a great question, since we seem to be aligned around like actions as a shorthand or syntactic sugar. there are a couple main questions. The first is like, do we want to allow actions that like suppress columns? Do we, when you're transforming, like, can any action actually produce a value of a different type? Right. And then I think we get into kind of the low level details, because like SHA-256, for example, I think much like our hash function for bucketing, we need to specify for every type, this input value gets you this output value, and like how to do it, and have a set of tests in the spec that people can build against. So
Yeah.
that's kind of tough.
Actually,
all
he
think about
touched
it.
on one point that I think is really important, because I looked at this a little while ago, and a lot of engines don't support the idea of having some sort of policy that changes the type, right? So if it's defined in the schema as a string, you can't return an integer, or something like that. And if we're talking about compatibility and actions being kind of a ubiquitous thing, we are kind of limited to what is the subset of capabilities that we see out there.
And so that, I think, is actually a good reason to describe these very thoroughly. What types can they accept? What values do they produce? Because like clearly, last four, like that doesn't make sense with an integer, or maybe it does, but like we need to figure that out. This, I think, is also an argument for actions in general, because rather than saying like all of these rules for transformations, we kind of just focus in on this is, the specific definition for an action.
Okay.
I'll shut up. I think Talet's next.
Talet's next, and then Prashant has like highlighted that he's already got this captured in the.
Can we, my understanding is action is basically data masking rules, right? Can we say I am just suggesting as a name, like rather than action, can we say masking rules or masking? Then it could be more descriptive for that. And the second thing is what the Daniel say that, at least on BigQuery, we just have the default values for, the columns, which makes them directly the masking, and those doesn't change the the types, and it should be stay with the type. My understanding, Prashant.
Yeah. So first one is that we are describing action as, yes, like one of the actions, if you see, is apply transform, and another action I think I could very well expect is apply UDF, for example, or apply
You apply UDF and transform is basically the general action. I agree, but
Exactly.
the rest of them is just masking.
Yes. So that's why the actions which are containing to mask, right, have like a mask as a prefix to them. And
there is no replace with null value.
Yeah, I mean, replace with null is a different debate. We are thinking of replacing it with like a void transform. So void already has we already have a transform that returns null. It's anyways gonna get removed. So there's a history. I have a PR open for that to add into the examples. But mask as a prefix for the things that apply with mask is something that we want. I think that will be fine. Yeah.
Okay, I see. I understand.
Yeah. But things like, action applying a transform, actions applying an expression, actions applying an, let's say, UDF, those can be generic thing. That's why it's action for now. So that's one of the context. The second thing, from the data types perspective, I totally agree. And I think I can clarify in the action itself that, okay, they are type preserving, but as a general rule itself, we have written, and I think there was a debate when we introduced SHA-256 that what is the input if it's a binary type, what is the output and everything. But as a rule itself, in the defining the how the projections or what the projections would mean, we have said that it's type preserving.
Okay.
Yeah. So This can supersede, this can this rule can be inherited when we are applying actions, but we can always be more clear on that front on what that would look like on the data types by giving examples, as Ryan said, and like be more thorough about what is the input type and what the output type is expected on that front. So yeah, so that's another clarification on this one. There is one more aspect I think we touched that. Okay, what is the minimum set of actions we want to go forward with? I have some thoughts on it, but like do we how to put it in this way? The open questions that we have on actions and types and what does action means, is that something that we concluded, or do we have more questions on that front, so that we can go on the list that we want to define inside this?
So I have my hand up just to say.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no worries.
Yeah.
I agree. Like, I think action is a good descriptor for it right now. But if we wanted to change that, so I actually think masking rules would be more confusing. But if we wanted to change that, I think the question to answer is what Prashant just asked, which is like, what actions are we, planning on shipping with as a minimum viable set? I think that there's a good room for debate here, right? Like last n, first n, do we parameterize those? Do we just hard code it to 4? Like there are quite a few details here that we need to think through. And I think that question, and like also, do we ship out of the box with UDF support, given that we currently don't have UDFs in the implementation, like, or do we just say, we're going to do this common set of actions? I think those are good things to talk through.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I would consider is like, if we're intending to add a more complicated version of this that can do much more stuff, maybe manipulate return types, have like parameters and all these other things to, shape the behavior of it. Like, hey, what do I want my masking character to be? What do I want? Like, it seems like it makes sense not to drift down that path with the actions, like have a simple standard set. And some of those decisions we may leave up to engines, like, hey, what character do you use to mask? Like, maybe there's something that the engine cares about. Maybe we want to define it. We can kind of work through what that set is, as opposed to doing kind of like a Venn diagram of like, hey, you can do these things in UDFs, you can do these things in actions, and there's like a significant overlap because we like drifted the actions into too much like parameters, a bunch of other, configuration options, settings, properties. If we do that, like I feel like we're getting to the point where we should just do the full UDF thing and not do the actions. So
I
simple.
think I agree with Dan here, but there are some helpful questions for us to like sort of explore that space, which honestly might be an argument against actions, but we can take it there. So I would say there's clearly like a show last n characters. N is, I think, 95% of the time 4, because it's last 4 of a phone number, it's last 4 of a social security number, or it's whatever. Do we want to make that show last n, or do we want to make that show last 4? Like that's a very concrete question that we can ask ourselves. And I'm going to add a second one to think through at the same time, because the answer is probably the same for both, which is assuming that you want a like hash of something, do you want to be able to generate a seed for that hash so that people cannot tell the values are the same across tables, right? So if you hash an ID value, like if you say, hey, you know what, you can see the hashed IP, you can see the hashed email address. You may want to say, generate a random seed for this so that it's consistent within a table but not across tables? I'm glad I'm seeing some strong reactions, but like I think the answer is probably the same to those two questions, and then we just need to be confident that our answer is a good one. I'll hand it off to Talit.
Okay, I agree with Dan and this and Ryan also too. But when I look at the why we need the masking rules, it is a PII data, and the PII data is very, very well defined. Your date of birth should be get masking, which means that we should have some kind of date year masking, because your birth of year is not the PII, but the date of birth is the masking. And if you are working on some data, just find your demography about your data. You need the year, and the masking has to be on date of birth. And email is also same. Email is PII data, but your domain is not your PII data. And basically, we should have the email masking too. And hash is, I agree with Ryan, hash is predictable. Sometimes you don't want to be the predictable, even you do the hash, then random hash is required. And random hash, email masking, date year masking, and last for and first for, those are the social security related things. Should we provide it directly? This is my the thought. Prashant.
So for in this context, last 4 versus last 10, it's very interesting. The thing is, do we care about consistent output across engine when these masking policies are enforced? Is that something we want? And I think yes. So for that, we need to agree on what the N is across engines whenever we try to have that, because that's how we have some predictability there. And then to second with that, when we are having hash functions where seed can be random and mask can be random, it becomes hard to predict on what happened, what is the thing. And when I'm seeing just some output with Spark, when I'm seeing output with Trino, I mean, I might be confused on what happened there. So I would say that we need to define this mask in such a way the output of them are in as much interoperable or consistent across engines as possible. If it means to defining to even the seed, or give some recommendation about how this masking function, if it uses a seed or something, how it should be generated or something of that sort, as a recommendation in the worst case, so that we have some consistency across engine when they are enforced. So that's one of my take regarding having everything in the actions versus UDF. I mean, action, I think at this point we all agree is for just no brainer, or things that we know that this is going to happen. And UDF can be any complicated thing, like, okay, I have a mapping table in which I have certain set of users and I need to execute a join, and that's no brainer for defining that as an argument or as a UDF there. But for things like single args that operates on a single column, that's very well known. I think action might be still a little bit better use case to have, rather than defining a full-fledged UDF, because we can go into every dialect and then write that. And the last to say on to Talat's point on the the date as a masking function, we already have transforms year, month, year, day. So we can see if that can be leveraged on that front. So I added the note in the read restriction one as well. So if we want to leverage that, so that's my take on the overall thing. With this, Dan, you want to go next?
Yeah, I was gonna respond, I guess, first to the question about hashes and seeds and things like that. Like these specific ones, we probably need to do deep dives into each one once we get the full list. With that, like that one specifically, I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that we need to define as part of the actual function. It's actually probably more of an engine consideration, because usually when you're doing hashes, you actually want to join across data sets without exposing that information. And seeds are used to prevent somebody from doing a dictionary attack or something like that against the value to try and figure out what it actually is. So trying to define a seed from us doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense, because it's really like you want to be able to join things. You want a consistent hash. The engine should probably be doing a seed to make sure that you can't attack that hash, but that's not necessarily something that we need to define for that particular behavior. Again, like we should dig into this. We should look into how engines are doing this for these hashes.
It definitely is something that we need to define. So if it needs to be consistent across engines, so that two engines are producing the same hashed value,
Ooh,
right? When you read,
see,
okay,
that's
so
the question. That one I'm not convinced that we necessarily want to, try and go through the cross engine plus these, masking things and like.
But okay, so actually, I think I see and agree with your point, because this is read time and engines have access to the data. So it does not necessarily need to be that it is the same. Like, I guess the question is, if we hash something and I read it in Trino and I get the same row from Trino and Spark, should those hash values match? I mean, my answer would probably be yes, unless there is a flag that says, you know what, make this hash value unique to this table. Because I think that there are cases when you do want masks across tables to be joinable, and there are cases where you don't. So I think we need to think through those cases. I am still leaning toward having a seed, whether that's randomly generated or whether that is, however you do it. Like, that way you can see this hash function on table A and this hash function on table B will or will not produce the same values. Yeah. And you get the same values across engines, which I think would be important, because that avoids confusion if we had someone, run the same query in two places, see the same row, and it doesn't match just because an engine chose a random seed. I would also like to separately address Prashant's assertion about transforms. Partition transforms, I think, should not be used here. While you can take a partition transform and run it on data, partition transforms typically produce a different type. So, for example, the year transform that you talked about does not produce anything suitable for a mask. So what we do is we take the year and we subtract 1970 from it, and you get some ordinal value. That is not a timestamp and not a date. It's an int. And so, like, it changes the type. It changes the, what you see. You would get, like 34 for 2004. And like what we want for a date mask would actually be like 1/1/2026 for anything in 2026, right? Rather than some year ordinal. So I highly recommend not thinking about the partition transforms in this way. The partition transforms are defined for the purpose of partitioning, and really are not like something that produces user readable data.
Yeah, and that also highlights one of the challenges with the can't change the type. Talking about date mask, you can't produce something that's like ***96. It has to be an actual date value. And
I think that's doable, right?
Yeah,
like we just need to, for every single thing, if it's a well-defined thing, say, okay, your year or year month, whatever mask function produces this for this input, is well-defined and only works for, the following types. I think that those things are all doable though, right? Like once we have the set of things that we need to do.
But I think, okay, if we look at our most common cases, it's going to be string and masking, right? Numeric masking has the same problems that date masking has. You have to figure out, well, am I just zeroing out fields? Like what does that actually mean? And maybe we can look to Ranger or some of these others to figure out, like, well, what are standards that people are using in other places? String seems to be the most common. The first n, last n, that's going to cover the vast majority of use cases. Yeah, I'm open to either. Like, if it really turns out that it's really just 4, we should just do the simple thing and do what Ranger does and just say, hey, first 4, last 4. You know?
Prashant?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me on simplifying with the set of masks that we want to conclude on. I did some research already, and I mean, I think except date for email and for last n, I had a recommendation to include that in the list. But going back to the discussion of, I want to talk more about the hash function and the seed one which we are generating. I just saw one interesting way to describe this. The way we are then talking is not hash, we are talking about random hash as a mask. So when, at least in BigQuery, what I'm seeing, they explicitly call that thing as random hash.
Well, hold on. What do you mean by random hash? Because, like, ultimately, if you're gonna like make it non-usable as a hash, so if it's not joinable to something else, then you might as well just use null or complete map.
There is also SHA
Well,
256, right?
yeah. So the idea though is that, like, if it's completely random, then it's not really usable, right? You're just producing a value for some reason.
This is the reason, right? You don't want to predict the people's name, and that's why you want to generate a random hash.
Yeah, but if it's truly a random hash and not an actual hash or a seeded hash, then there's no use in generating that value. You just make it null or you just fully mask it.
I mean, with null, it's tricky because what if the column was not nullable? We have
and that's why I'm saying, like, you could just do stars, right? You could just say 10 stars or something like that. It's just like, I'm not sure that I understand, and maybe I need to read their description of it, because a truly random hash is not usable.
Yeah. So, I mean, redacting it to star means that we have a string data type, right? For example, right? And then we apply that. But maybe random hash can take one data type and return something else. I mean, I can take a look into what the data types are supported in this random hash. But the point I was trying to say is that in that sense, if we call this as a hash, then we need to be consistent at what that hash produces. In case we don't want that value to be predicted, maybe random hash would sound a little bit better on that case. Is the one thing that I wanted to say on this random hash or hash not being consistent across systems. Okay, I'll give it back to Ryan on this one. So, Ryan.
Actually, I think it's pretty interesting, that random hash, because that gets to the question that we were talking about, which is, if I read that correctly, a random hash essentially generates hash values that are consistent within a query.
Yeah, it's a bad name.
Okay, so name aside, that is basically what I was talking about with, do you want a consistent hash value across tables so you can join, or do you want, these things to be different, right? If you're generating a hash value per query, it's always going to be different. You can't even see the same value in a query. And so, like, I think that actually makes a good deal of sense to say a randomly seeded hash.
So I'm not convinced that, like, what you're saying and what this does is quite the same thing. The way that I would expect this to work is that it is actually a query local hash. So even if I use 2 tables with the same values within the context of that query, the hash will be the same, so I can group by and I can join. But I can't write that out and then join to another table.
I think that this is unclear whether the same random value is used across tables. So
It is.
like this is something that we would need to decide, but this is good prior art for how you might have a hashed value that is not, that has different properties than a consistent hash every single time.
And I think that just like reframing this a little bit, it sounded like Talit said, yeah, this is actually how BigQuery works. Like it will be the same hash across multiple tables. It's within the scope of a query. Is that right, Talit?
Correct.
So then we have like consistent hash, we have query local hash, we have ways that we can define this to shape that behavior that I think doesn't require us necessarily providing a seed. And then the only question is the cross engine. Like, do we want consistent to actually work across engines?
Well, so I think like the simplest thing is if you want join across table to work and you want consistency across queries and engines, we define a hash function with a specified seed, just like we do for Iceberg's bucketing function, right? That way, same input value, same output value, no matter what.
The only difficulty there is like the seed is then sensitive.
No, this is the same seed for everything.
No, you
Okay.
need to protect that seed
Yes.
value.
So you could build tables and reverse the hash there. So the only way around that, if you want consistency across engines, consistency across tables, etc., is to parameterize or put the seed into the definition.
And then protect it.
Right. But I mean, I'm assuming it would be protected, right?
So far, we don't have any metadata that we have to protect like that. So like this adds an additional concern, which is now portions of metadata actually.
We do have metadata. So we have prior art for this in when we return a response with a vended credential, that is something that the engine gets that should not be shown. I think this would be the exact same thing where like if you're a trusted engine, you get read restrictions. If you are not a trusted engine, you don't. And when you get read restrictions, you don't show those read restrictions to users. I'm more concerned right now with what is the minimal set of things we need to support.
So we could say the minimal set of things is query local hashes, right? That doesn't, because now we're actually putting a catalog responsibility, which is similar to vended credentials, where a catalog has to manage this. It needs to store this information, and it needs to provide it for trusted clients, which I totally buy. That's very reasonable. That is consistent with the way that we do like vended credentials. But then we have to figure out, well, how do we spec that out for producing and sending that to the client? We need to make sure that, that's secured.
I agree. I would do two though. I would do one with a fixed hash that is consistent everywhere, that is not secured. And then one with like to avoid needing to pass a seed around and parameterize, have users select a seed or whatever. There is query local and there is global.
Yeah. Well,
That
so
always
then,
allows joining though, which I think is a little awkward.
well, so like the consistent hash, at least we could say a consistent hash, we will just pick some hashing function, SHA, something like that. And you just must use that. It's a consistent hash. If you're opting to do it, you're opening yourself up to an attack if that's a concern, right? There are lots of scenarios where that's not practical, so maybe it's not an issue for people. And query local is used for sensitive data, which is probably why like BigQuery includes that as an option as well. So you can still join, you can still do all those functions, but you don't have to worry about the sensitivity of it.
I think those are two good options. And I like that those extremes don't require putting into the action the seed and coordinating that. It doesn't require any any additional work on behalf of users or engines to ask users extra questions or anything like that. It's very simple, and we get everything except for I don't want to be able to join these, which if you don't want people to be able to join them, don't give them access to the same tables at the same time. So like that is a thing where if you're accessing these tables and you're accessing these tables, you have mutually exclusive permission sets. So I think that this is a very reasonable path forward that fits well within the actions idea and does not require parameterization. I'm sorry for jumping in, Prashant.
No, I think I agree with this. I mean, and the fact that, we have a dedicated section on where we return these evaluated policies, these can be part of the additional metadata that the catalog sends back to the client to apply those. Talking about which tables can be joined with which other tables. I was reading like in Snowflake has a dedicated join policy because Snowflake executes this query. They know which tables you are joining it against, which columns you're aggregating it against. It's in a better platform to, better position to enforce those restrictions via masking and like adding a masking on a column that is used in a join to have some consistency is an interesting thing that comes up. But yeah, I just wanted to put a support on this and bring up into a different kind of a policy, that is joint policies, which I think we might not be able to enforce in this particular section of read restrictions. Currently, as you said, we have wrap and DDM.
I think this is also an area where if you want to call a specific hash function with a specific seed and things like that, you can always make it a UDF, a secure UDF if you don't want the details shown to users, and you can you can take care of this with other means. But the default, like what do we provide as high-level functions, that just makes sense to me, that it would be these completely unparameterized functions with reasonable capabilities that I think will work for a majority of users.
Makes sense.
All
Okay.
right.
Okay.
So,
Cool. Wanted to. Okay. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
sorry. Returning to our, like, I gave two examples,
Mhm.
right? It was last n versus last 4,
Mhm.
and this
Hash.
hashing seed. I thought we'd probably go the other way with the hashing seed, but does this mean that we're thinking like just a action label and last 4 is going to be sufficient there, right? Because in our two examples of things you may need to parameterize, I think the harder one was hashing, and the easier one is like just last 4.
It makes sense. Do you recommend, like, we have truncate as also as already a defined mask for this? So then first 4 is also a mask that we want to define?
Good question.
And I have 2 more things that I think I researched and we talked about. This is like email mask, email as a mask. Like as we talked about, we just hash out the email's name, and after anything after that is not considered PII. So they have a dedicated mask in that sense that we'll just remove the username from the email, and then everything after @ is something that we'll show. Do we need a mask like that? Because that's also a very common way to do that. So there is 2. So based on my research, these 2 are more good candidates to then add to our list of dedicated transforms. What are your thoughts about email as a mask then? I mean, I'm assuming last 4, whatever we talk about last 4 will automatically follow on first 4 on a high basis. But thoughts? No thoughts with him saying.
I'm
Sorry, I dropped in.
about email. Sorry, go ahead.
I dropped in late, so I've missed a lot of our earlier conversation. But the email one strikes me as like something that's fun for users to look at, but I don't really understand the material benefit of knowing that it's like at Gmail. I don't know. What do you do with that information?
Interesting question. Maybe maybe hypothetically creating a case in which you want to know which domain users are your major users. Maybe
That kind of opens up the door, though, to is the domain sensitive in any way, right? Because then people can infer how many people are using this service versus this service. Like, is this person that I've got a record for, like using some very specific domain?
There's also vanity domains, right? Like I know someone who is the last name family.net.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Like there can be technically PII in the actual domain portion of it. So like if we're trying to be, make useful functions, why wouldn't full mask just work for that? All stars.
And at that point where it's all stars, maybe that's last four, maybe that's mask alphanumeric. Like I would say it's probably just mask alphanumeric. Then you still get an @ symbol in there and it's fine. So I agree with Russell. I don't think that there is anything other than people going a little overboard with masking policy. Because I still want to see some stuff. I want it to look like an email address.
Yeah.
That makes sense then. I think that's one other mask that came across then. And the last one, I mean, this is, I can make a list again. I mean, of what all things are possible today via transforms versus via today with Ranger and BigQuery, and then make a recommendation on what that list would be, and we can go from there. How do we go about this? Because this email mask is something that standard out, and I mean, date will also come from now. That we need to define a date mask in which, how do we have that mask applied on date columns. And we kind of discussed a little bit about that. We don't want transform to be repurposed for that particular use case. So that other thing that comes up. And this is more on the discussion about consolidating a list that we need, that's a MVP that we need to go with. And then we want to define it as actions here.
So, I mean, even thinking about just the way that we're talking about these masks, I think leaning towards the most the most aggressive in terms of like the sensitivity across the board makes the most sense. It's like full mask makes sense.
Yes.
Null out.
Yes.
First four, last four, just because that's pretty common. And then not doing anything that would expose anything different until we come up with a use case. Because it's like, hey, we like to see clever formats or, things that look like, oh, an SSN mask or something that uses ***, but like, is it really necessary? Last four is probably good enough. So why over specify things for syntactic sugar as opposed to just focusing on what are the base things to redact as much information as possible? Like that being the guiding principle of like, do we need something extra? Does it need to be formatted? Probably not. Talent?
I just want to, to say date year mask is also important. Most of the demographic related works, that this is very commonly used for the data analysis. I cannot say the same thing for email, but the definitely birth of years or the register of years, some kind of year and month related things is required. Right.
I agree with both of those. I think probably email is out. To Dan's point, I agree with what you're saying. And if I would go a step further, I think when we are talking about what is the easiest, most portable things, we need to be careful about security, right? Like, so we could have, hey, there's an email mask, but if you have some, a vanity domain or anything like that, you destroy the masking, you destroy the protection from having a masking policy. So we should not do that, right? We should come up with things that are fairly strict and well known. And we should always be, pretty much on the side of we're not going to do, like if you want to go to the level of taking on that risk in your masking policy because you really like that @ symbol in the middle of your redacted string, cool, you can go do that. But we should do things that have broadly workable policies. And then I will agree, like, I think we do need some sort of date time masking, probably year or year month, or maybe both. I don't know.
This sounds reasonable. I mean, I think this is a solid set to start with. I'll again do for the sanity check on any such more masks that I might have missed, but at least so far, these seems to be the very obvious ones. So we'll work towards the list. So far, I think then we conclude on the actions. I know, Sang, you have a hand up. I was just trying to conclude on this topic to take an action item on the list that we have discussed and search for more. If not, just update the spec with that. So I will let you go before me. Go ahead.
Yeah, hopefully this will be quick, but I just wanted to maybe share a different perspective about Ryan's point on the policies requiring to be sort of broadly acceptable. And that's because I don't think it's a good idea to introduce masking functions that require us to like know about the Iceberg specific semantics that have been defined within a specific table. And that's because even if the Iceberg REST catalog is the one that's actually kind of applying the read restrictions, the task of actually evaluating the authorization is actually delegated to other components in a lot of systems. So for those policies that take, the human user, whatever this actionist table is, as the input, for you to be able to decide what that read restriction should be in a very broadly accepted sense, will allow it to actually propagate that decision from something that already exists today into something like an Iceberg REST catalog and then propagate it back into the table metadata. So I think there's a very strong case for making sure that the read restriction is broadly accepted.
Got you. I mean, the way you're saying is that you might have an given policy store where you want to convert the existing policies into read restriction ways and then send it back to the caller. So the only thing that stands behind is that the existing policies needs to be adapted or transformed into the read restrictions way and then go forward from there. And at this point, we want to minimize such edge cases in which the existing policy stores existing policies conversion to the read restriction is smooth, right? That's
Yeah, and I think that also makes a case for why read restrictions we're discussing actually is a lot more attainable than secure UDFs, right? Because UDFs are defined with a specific name within the Iceberg REST catalog, and that's going to introduce tight coupling between the policy store that needs to be aware of what UDFs are supposed to call versus some concept of a read restrictions that can be broadly defined.
That makes sense. Sure. Yeah, point well taken, Sam. So, yeah, I think we're working towards that front on getting that standardized as much. Do you like? I know you are very heavy on like Bloomberg is very heavy on OPA. Any such policies that you have that is for sure not going to fit in on the read restrictions? Predefined mask is also something that we will be very open to in case you have recommendations on that front.
Yeah, so we're actually just actively developing it. I think we'll be developing things in tandem. So like I'll be advocating for read restrictions that are like kind of aligned with what we were discussing here. But I think nullability, sort of hashing are definitely things that are coming up.
Got you. Yeah, please keep us posted in case you have any list, and obviously we are having this discussion, so your inputs are very valuable on that front. Okay, so just to conclude on this list, I think the list that we have at this point and what we discussed seems like a solid list to start with. I will do a sanity check on any such things I might have missed. So far, this seems to be the solid set for me as well. Regarding the mask that we want to, the actions we want to additionally define, that is last and first and the date actions. I will take a deeper look and propose some write-up on that on the spec, and we can go from there. Does it sounds good as next step on this action versus transform discussion? Yeah, okay. Russell, do you have a question on types? Yes, we are making sure that the mask output is the same type as that of the column output as part of the read restrictions of this one.
So hash and
yes,
random hash, what are they doing? If I random hash a time column, what do I get? Okay, so it just must be a string. Okay. Okay,
I
that's
think
cool.
we are clear that we know what types of masks we need to produce, but it is unclear whether we want to expand those types, right? So this is going to take a little bit more work to say, okay, can I hash an integer? And if I do, what do I get? Do I get like just the first 32 bits? Like, I think that it is reasonable for us to consider those things. We can always, well, it's reasonable to consider, but we don't know the answer to can I hash an integer yet.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, cool.
No, basically, if we support the byte directly for any masking, then we solved that issue, right? The string is a special case for the byte, and we can say that, hey, string, we return the string, but the rest of the things you have to give us the byte, then we will return the byte.
But bytes output needs to be converted into the hash output, which operates on byte, needs to return an output that can be converted into an integer, right?
No, I'm not saying that integer. That's why I'm saying that our masking policies can support string and byte. If your field is not the byte, then you cast the byte and send our masking and do
So,
whatever you want.
yes, there are ways to say if I have integers, if I have an integer, turn it into bytes, hash those bytes, turn them back into an integer. The question, I think, is that going to be valuable and worth specifying? I would probably lean into saying yes, because it's pretty easy to hash an integer and get an integer out. And like, I would just say, like, lean into if we think we might have to add it later because people want to hash their long, big int IDs or whatever, let's do it. Like, that's not a huge issue. I would rather specify, like, here is a long hash to long function than need to go worry about compatibility later when some engine assumes that a SHA-256 action doesn't cover some type, and then you have fragmentation. So I would probably lean into that for as many types as possible. However, we know things like date functions, like, we're not going to take an integer as the input to a date and then assume that we can, like, cast that to a date and then do it. Like, we're going to be strict on some, more permissive on others, and I think that is kind of the homework that we need to do outside of this to bring back to this next discussion. What are the reasonable things and why? And Prashant, I can think through those things with you if you want.
So I mostly agree with you. I would prefer to lead with use cases that we know exist rather than just saying, like, hey, let's just allow hashing, because then we have to worry about things like, well, what if our hashing produces collisions and people are using those in queries to do group bys or something else, and it causes problems? Like,
hashing can always produce collisions.
Yes, but it's more likely with an int than it is with a SHA.
True.
And so this is where, like, I want to lead with the use cases. That's my preference. We know solid ones. Like, we have a full set of solid use cases that are, like, well understood and used across the industry. And if then we're like, oh, well, we can also do these other things and, like, just start, like, shuffling bytes, I'm concerned that we're focusing on the wrong thing.
I think it is fairly likely that people have IDs that become sensitive because the ID in a system, once you expose it, becomes PII, right? And so if you expose my UID ID that describes my user, then it becomes PII if I know what that is. And so, like, being able to hash whatever ID you're using, even if you made some fairly silly choices, it makes sense to me. Would I hash floats? No. right? But we know big int is used. Int is int would be fine. Who cares? Like and collisions we don't need to worry about. You have to worry about collisions no matter what. Prashant?
Yeah, one question on this front itself is that do we want to go into very much depth in defining which data types this hash applies from day one, or is our guiding goal that, okay, the output data type must be same as that of the input data type when this action or transform is applied, sufficient enough to gate those things?
I think we need to enumerate them.
Okay.
Because if there are certain ones that we don't understand, we don't want different implementations taking different approaches, right? So if we were to say like, hey, you can hash based on bytes anything, and then somebody says, well, I'm going to implement time because I think that's yeah. So we want to be explicit. I think it's better to be explicit. It's not that much extra work to just define which types.
And I think the other thing is we not only do we need to produce the same type as the input type, it actually needs to be somewhat reasonable of a value, right? So yes, I can hash a big int. That means I have a function that could hash a timestamp. Does it make sense to hash a timestamp? I don't think so. Right? Like, and so there are going to be some tough decisions, and we can go through that. In general, I agree with Dan. I would probably be a bit more permissive and say like numeric, like integer types, yes, but floats, date, time, stuff like that, no.
Then you're just leaving it up to the engines to whether they agree with you, right? So the implementer, Trino may say, hey, we think it makes no sense to do floats. And Spark may say, hey, floats, go for it. And then
no, I'm saying like we specifically say this function applies to like SHA-256 applies to ints, big ints, strings, and binary, and that's it.
Yeah.
Or maybe not even binary.
Makes sense. I know we are out of time, but there's one aspect that I wanted to touch is that policy definition and attachment happens in the catalog. We are giving back the post-attachment result as part of our authorization predicate. So are we saying that by saying that, okay, this thing can be attached to this particular type only, we are explicitly saying that, okay, this policy types, or in case anyone wants to attach this and use it as part of read restriction, catalog should be aware that they don't attach hash inside those the columns that are of different types. So it's indirectly influencing that as well. So I was just like not going into influencing the attachment of the policies, but definitely if that helps clarity on this hash function because it's Iceberg defined, we can go about that as a guiding principle. Okay.
I think it's necessary.
Okay.
Unfortunately, because you can't, like, I mean, the catalog, of course, if it's doing, internal, external, different things, like it can limit what can be accessed, or it can even choose a more restrictive policy to send to clients, just like null out. Like, hey, if I've got some policy that I can't enforce, I shouldn't be sending that to a client in a way that would then either leak information or be inconsistent. So you either have to choose like, I'm not going to allow access because you can't do the things that are defined, or I have to choose something that's more restrictive than whatever is defined in the policy. And that is up to the catalog implementation, like how they want to expose that.
I think we have two options here for how to handle unsupported types. So one, we could say, this is not defined. You may not run this function on a float, right? Like you cannot hash a float. Don't do it. You can't attach policy that requires that you do that. I think that would be reasonable, but people could do anything. We could also say the hash of a float is null in all cases.
My comment was more general, that there's going to be policy. And so let's say if your system, like if you have an internal system that has a complicated email, redaction policy that allows for domain or a subset of domain, like something complicated. And then you have something that's coming in from a defined external access with standard Iceberg the catalog has to decide, do I make a more restrictive policy and allow that consumer to read it, or do I just block them because they can't enforce the policy that I've actually determined should apply to this table? That's always going to be a case, right?
Yeah, I think that is getting a little far into catalog decisions.
But that's what Prashant was asking about, is that like, hey, if the policy evaluation is happening in the catalog and something is defined there, you need to be able to represent that to the external client in some way. And it's either tightening the requirement so the external client can access it, or it's disallowing access. Like you wouldn't give up and be like, okay, you can just have the data. Like you have to choose either more restrictive or you have to deny access, but that's a catalog decision. So that I was thinking that was what Prashant was asking about. So I was kind of answering in line with just like the, hey, generally, how do catalogs that can do more complicated things handle this?
Or is possible that that's part of the policy design, because when they design the policy within the catalogs or any teams who wrote this policy, you have to look at the reader restriction, like the IRC spec, and to explicit spec out. If that happens, how do we handle that? It's either just fail, or we can fall back to something more restrictive. Yeah, I would not allow catalog to make that decision in that case. Like, still users' responsibility to make that be.
And the definition, like what we're talking about with actions, is a simple version. So we know policy evaluation across lots of different systems is going to have much more complicated stuff that they can express than what we'll be able to do with actions. Which is why, in the future, UDFs and other things could close some of those gaps, but we're always going to be in a space where like actions is defined as a subset of things we think are common use cases, and there will be a whole world of other things that will exist outside of that.
Makes sense. I think then, at least at the time of policy policy attachment and definition itself, we need to make sure that whenever policy attached to that type, we reference that, okay, this is the corresponding action in the read restriction, and we block it there rather than blocking the load table, because then the table becomes in an inconsistent state because we expect all the IRC client to follow this. So, I mean, then that seems like a reasonable approach as part of the policy definition and attachment. Okay, then yeah, cool. That's something that I just wanted to say that, okay, we are indirectly influencing that, but I think it's a conscious choice we are taking, and I think it's a right thing to do. So, okay. Cool. From the data type, as I said, I mean, Ryan, I'll also reach out to you, and yeah, let's get more on the data types on how we want to do for the common masking functions, and we can go from.
Sounds great.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time in joining this. Have a good day. Bye.